Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land. Today we're going to be taking a look at Tess of the Durbevilles. And I hope you've got your scuba gear on because we're going deep. Hello, my name is Tristan. Welcome to my channel. If you're new to this channel, we focus here not just on overviews of books, but we want to go deep to extract the marrow out of a book, to really find the meaning and the message that the authors were trying to get across, which is one of the massive things that identifies a classic. I do just have to say that there will be some spoilers in this video. However, that doesn't mean to say you can't watch it before reading the book. I went to see Titanic and I knew exactly how that was going to end up. In fact, I met my parents going into the film when I had just finished it, so I went back in and watched it 2 times on the trot. I do like that film. The book's central character is Tess Durbevilles, and in the first chapter of the book, a parson tells her father that the Durbevilles actually got their name as a derivative from Durbevilles, which was an aristocratic family in the area in the Middle Ages. Now the father's a drunk. Tess lives at home with him and his wife and her brothers and sisters. They live in poverty, but with this knowledge of being Durbevilles in the past, they find out that there is actually an Alec Durbeville living in some great mansion nearby, and they tell Tess, why don't you go and work there, and surely he will help out the family when he knows our background. Tess goes along. Alec Durbeville is a rake, a scoundrel, a cad, a bounder, and many other fruitier words which we could use in the 21st century, but we don't on this channel. He seduces her and he sexually assaults her. Used and now unchaste, despite it not being her fault, Tess has to move away from the area. She tries to set up a new life on a farm. Now she meets a young man whom she really respects, who's very virtuous, and he falls in love with her, and they get married, and then things fall apart once again when she's betrayed, and she's left then in another bad situation, and things just keep getting worse and worse for her. She's just a woman of suffering until she eventually dies. I won't tell you how she dies. That's something you can find out by reading the book. It won't be what you expect. The story itself guts you. It cleaves one in twain and leaves you on the floor in despair, agony and grief in an amazing way that you enjoy. Which, if you've read it, you might be thinking, I sense there's more to this story than just the story. And I can't put my finger on it. Now, this is what this video we're going to take a look at least from my perspective. And if you've got the book, go and get it off your shelf. And references I make, I'll tell you what chapter they're in and see if you can find them. And then judge for yourself what we're talking about. The theme of the book can be found right at the end of chapter 37 if you want to look it up. There's a quote put in here by Hardy, which is from the poet Browning, who says, God is in his heaven and all is well with the world. Just look at the editing of that phrase at the end of chapter 37. Thus he beheld her recede, and in the anguish of his heart quoted a line from a poet with peculiar emendations of his own. God's not in his heaven, all's wrong with the world. That is the main idea and thrust of the whole book. What makes Tess of the Durbevilles at times such a grueling book, or at least it takes a heavy toll on our emotions, I think lies in the fact that in this book we find an author in inner turmoil, and that's expressed through his characters. It's almost like Hardy is thrashing about trying to find meaning in life, because Tess gets thrown back and forth by the whims of fate and also by the horribly twisted constraints of the society that she lives in. An obvious one is the religious structure of the day. But it's not just that. There's also the philosophy of humanism, which is explored in this. But humanism mixed with materialism of its day, which of course was in the ascendancy in the latter 19th century. And Thomas Hardy seems to be caught betwixt and between both of them. Hardy himself, you would say, was more of a humanist. He definitely lent to the humanist side of things. It's almost like Hardy himself is tussling with where is morality, what is right, what is wrong, what's the meaning of life. Irrespective of your own personal beliefs, this book is great because it's a good example of how you can study an author through his own words. And if you put your own personal opinions aside, you can see the grandness of this topic. But that's the theme. God's not in his heaven, so a question mark over religion and the existence of God, and all's wrong with the world. That humans, even on a humanist level, they haven't made an improvement either. And this is what we're going to find epitomized in this book. If you go to the end of chapter 11 in your book, the second to last paragraph has got a very interesting comment. We have to remember that this is after Alec d'Urberville has assaulted Tess in the chase, that's the forest. The second to last paragraph, towards the end of that paragraph, it says, "But might some say, where was Tess's guardian angel? Where was the providence of her simple faith? Perhaps, like the other god of whom the ironical Tishbite spoke, he was talking, or he was pursuing, or he was in a journey, or he was sleeping and not to be waked." So what's being said here is Tess, poor Tess, she's innocent, she's good, she's pure, she's tried to help her family, she's been harassed by this guy Alec, and then he's assaulted her. And Hardy is saying, where was the guardian angel then? Where was divine providence? He mentions the ironical Tishbite. Now, the person he's referring to there is in the book of Kings, it's the prophet Elijah, and he says at a test of the gods, the God of Israel and Baal, he says about Baal not answering their prayers, where is your God? Maybe he's asleep and needs waking. Maybe he's got some concern that he's dealing with. That's why he's not answering your prayer. Now, that's what Hardy is bringing up here. Where is God when those who suffer need him most, even those who believe in him? And I think that really strikes out at the church's teachings or failure to teach, because there are certainly good answers in the scriptures to that question, but Hardy is asking it and is looking for a reasonable answer. Now, I say reasonable answer because at the end of the next chapter, chapter 12, if you look there, the very last sentence is this sort of unthinking statement that was prevalent in society. In fact, you can find this sentence used today. And it just didn't cut ice with Hardy. It's her mum talking to her when she said, why didn't you warn me about bad men, that they can do this to a girl? This is what her mother says. Well, we must make the best of it, I suppose. 'Tis nater, after all, and what do please God. And here we've got this very interesting thing. It's nature for a man to do this. That's odd. And it's God's will if he lets it happen. That's also very odd. And so can you see how Hardy and we are now saying, yeah, what is fair? Where was God? But also, is it nature for that? We repel against the idea that that's just natural. And so Hardy has now set this stage for the idea of suffering. And is there an answer to it? Is there a way to reform society in a way that's fair for everybody? And he's going to look at not so much at religion, because he'll point out its faults, but he's going to look at the other philosophy that sort of vies for control in human society at this time to explain suffering and a meaning of life. Finishing off his idea of repugnance towards some of the religious teachings of the time, if you look into chapter 14, you'll see Tess in a horrible situation. She's got pregnant by Alec in that horrible scene. She's had a baby and that baby is dying. Now she's tried to look after it. She loves it and now it's dying. And she's worried because it's not baptized, it's not going to be able to see God. Because one, it's not baptized, and secondly, it's a child born in sin according to the church. And then she starts envisaging it, and you'll find this in chapter 14. She thinks of the child, this young baby, being consigned to hell and being tossed up in the air by the devil on a pitchfork and tortured and tormented because it wasn't baptized, because the church wouldn't let it in, and because it was born in sin. She asked a local pastor, could he come quickly and baptize the child? And he says no, because it was born in sin. And it's terrible, and he can't just accept that. Now, we revolt against that, okay? Most people who are religious revolt against what happens there. But the church back then evidently was quite strict and unforgiving. It's very interesting what Tess says to the curate. She says, "Then I don't like you," she burst out, "and I'll never come to your church no more. Don't, for God's sake, speak as a saint to a sinner, but as you yourself to me myself, poor me." Now this is an interesting statement. She's saying the over piousness, the almost pharisaical attitude found in scripture of the religious leaders of Jesus' day, who looked down on others. And this is something Hardy cannot stand. He hates the society that is so cruel to everybody, that has the haves and the massive have-nots. The BBC rendition takes a terrible liberty with this scene. In it, she says, "I don't like you nor your God." Did you notice that is not what Tess said in this passage? "I don't like you," the curate who's acting as saint to sinner, "and I won't come to your church no more. I don't follow your creed. Your ideas are barbaric." She doesn't say, or Hardy doesn't say, "I don't believe God." He says, "I don't believe the church's representation of God." And that's a massive difference. But can you see, this is how he set up the problem. There's the church of the day has failed to explain and give meaning to suffering. And so we're thrashing around trying to find something else. What's so beautiful about the character Tess and the way Hardy writes her is she is a representative of all suffering, particularly all suffering women. When he describes her eyes, it's very interesting what he says. He says they were neither blue nor brown, nor grey nor lilac. Well, they've got to be some colour. But by not being so particular about her image, what Hardy's allowing us to do as a reader is to draw her in our mind. She is a representative of a type, the type that are suffering. The other thing Hardy does with Tess, which is simply wonderful, is he makes her a neutral ground between these ideas of man's philosophies, humanism, different religious creeds, all that. She's a neutral ground. She is nature. She is what is natural. And we find this in chapter 18 of the book. We find this probably the most commented on paragraph amongst all critiques of this book. It's at a point where Tess has come to the dairy farm now. She's escaped from where she was. She's away from Alec Durbevilles. And there's a man at the dairy farm whom she's beginning to be drawn to. She hears him playing on his instrument as she's walking towards the farm. And just listen to how she is described. The outskirt of the garden in which Tess found herself had been left uncultivated for some years and was now damp and rank with juicy grass which sent up mists of pollen at the touch. And with tall blooming weeds emitting offensive smells, weeds whose red and yellow and purple hues formed a polychrome as dazzling as that of cultivated flowers, she went stealthily as a cat through this profusion of growth, gathering cuckoo spittle on her skirts, cracking snails that were underfoot, staining her hands with thistle milk and slug slime, and rubbing off upon her naked arms sticky blights, which, though snow white on the apple tree trunks, made madder stains on her skin. Thus she drew quite near, still unobserved of him. What do you think of that? I had to read that a few times. There's a lot been said about this, that it's Tess's sexual desire waking up and all that kind of stuff. Phooey is what I say to that. And I think it says more about our day and age that sex is read into every book. I think that says more than anything else about our system. This is not what Hardy's driving at, because the theme of the book is God is not in his heaven and all is wrong with the world. It's got nothing to do with love affairs. That's the mode of exploring, as we'll come to when we realise who it is she's fallen in love with. What Hardy does in this beautiful, beautiful passage, for me, he paints up a very pretty scene, a very picturesque scene, a thoughtful scene. You can see Tess moving along. Now, she's frequently referenced as something to do with nature. She is called part of the landscape when she walks. Her newfound friend, Claire, his name is, the one that she ends up falling in love with, he calls her Artemis Demeter. Now, Artemis is the god of the hunt, of wild animals, of moon, of chastity. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest, so the earth and its bounty. Tess is clearly being described here as this neutral, nature in all its beauty. And with this, do you notice he refers to weeds with offensive smells, cuckoo spittle on her skirts, slug slime, cracking snail shells, damp, rank, juicy grass. Oddly, it's quite picaresque what he's describing, but he's using very normally horrible things, slug slime and snails. I think what he's saying is, with Tess, we're not judging. Take judgment away. These somewhat ugly things are actually beautiful in their environment. And some of the arbitrary constructs of society's morals have made certain people appear ugly when all they are is natural. And I think that's really what he's getting at here. And this is the important thing about Tess. She is a type and she is neutral. Hardy knows that life is beautiful, but it's what's been imposed on life and how people are treated that's so harsh and horrible. Can you see that? So now let's move on to the man she falls in love with, because it's really here that we begin to see hope ascend and then a tumbling down of an ivory tower, as it were, as Hardy explores not a religious side of society, but the more philosophical side of society. Remember, this is during the days, or past the days, of the Industrial Revolution, and it seems humans can conquer the earth, humans can do anything they want, humans are clever, humans will sort everything out. It's this idea of constant progress, which here in the book, the majority of this exploration by Hardy is going to be focused on that side. We can see religions have made an awful mess of things. Notice he doesn't say God. She says, I don't like your church, not your God, like the BBC said, where they read into it deliberately with an angle. Now let's see what he does with this character. Angel Clare is his name. He was brought up by religious parents. His brothers went to university to study divinity. He was meant to go and study divinity, but he lost his belief and is far more interested in human philosophies, humanism, materialism. And now he's away at this dairy farm because instead of becoming a priest or learning to be a priest, he's going to set himself up as a farmer, and he's learning his trade by working at a farm. Now, isn't it interesting, don't you think? Oh, excuse me, my chair's all over the place there. That his name is Angel. Do you remember right at the beginning when we saw Tess just assaulted like she was by Alec? Do you remember the question that Hardy raised? Where was her guardian angel? Now she's moved away from that area. She's starting afresh in an area where no one knows her. And who would be the man that she meets but a man called Angel? And in chapter 31, we find an interesting statement about Angel Clare, that he wants to look after her, to take care of her. And one of the sentences that he used is, he wants to keep her under his care. What's his name? Angel. What's he wanting to be? A guardian. He has come in as Tess's guardian angel. And because he's quite deliberately someone who has left the teachings of the church because he finds them unreasonable and he thinks they're faulty. And although he does appreciate the morality of the church in principle, he's now vaunted by Hardy as this alternative guardian angel. The guardian angel of the church forsook Tess. Maybe the guardian angel of human progress can take care of her. Now, their relationship is really good. You can see this natural love between Angel Clare and Tess. But there's a definite worrying idea that begins to develop quite early on. It's not dreadful, but there's a faint hint of the ominous about it. Just something doesn't fit right. And that is, Angel Clare idealizes Tess. There's a problem with idealizing something, is it sets one up for a fall. It can lead to grand disappointment. Now, Tess wants to tell Angel about her past with Alec. She needs to be honest with him to move forward. He actually says, there's no need to tell me about your past. I mean, what on earth can you have done? You're wonderful. Idealizing. So she writes a note to Angel explaining what happened between her and Alec Durbevilles. But when she pushes the note under his door, it goes under the door and under the carpet so he doesn't find it. And in the morning, when he comes down from his room to join them all in the farm, she's waiting for him to be angry, and he's absolutely fine. And she says, could it be that her doubts were childish? That he forgave her? That he loved her for what she was, just as she was? So there's hope. And remembering who Angel Clare seems to be representing, there's hope in humans finally getting it right. For Western man to solve the problem of suffering and to ascend higher than limiting morality as imposed by an elite clique at the top. But there is a problem. Tess will later say, I think it's about 4 pages later, "Oh, my love, why do I love you so?" She's talking to herself about Angel. "For she you love is not my real self, but one in my image, the one I might have been." Hardy is observing that people still set up ideals of how things should be, not as they are, and that we all as humans are prone to making constructs that everybody must fit into. Again, going with this idea, and all of this is in chapter 33, by the way, Angel Clare talks of Tess as a celestial person, one of the classic divinities. It's interesting, this classical divinity. His education, his reason, his intellect is painting this grandiose picture of Tess, much like the humanism of the day was painting a grandiose picture of nature. We need to follow nature. It is perfect. We should take every lead from nature. But the problem with Angel is he also likes the fact that she's a Durbevilles. He does like the idea that she has a good lineage. Even though she comes from a poor family, the lineage is good. He actually looks forward to surprising his parents, who are a little bit opposed to her to start with. He looks forward to bringing Tess to them and saying, and she's a Durbevilles, so she's a lady. He's not actually pulled away from the societal constraints. He's built this wonderful theoretical vision, but the actual change for those at the top is nothing. They're still interested in pride of place, in advancement, in position in society. And that will, of course, mean others are kept at the lower level. So we recognise that although there was great hope early on with Angel Clare being her guardian angel, that there may be cracks beginning to appear in his foundations. And that's borne out as we go along in their relationship. They decide that they're going to get married, and they tell the farmer and his wife, who are very happy. There's just this remarkable little thing that happens in the story as they're talking about setting up their new life with this farmer and his wife listening. A cock crows, and it cuts short the conversation they have, and they head away. Does that make you think of anything? A cock crowing. Remember what Jesus said to Peter on the night he was arrested. Peter said, "I will never leave you, Lord." And Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, Peter, before a cock crows, you will disown me 3 times. It's just a lovely foreshadowing, a very subtle one, that when they're talking about their future of being married, a cock crows. It's a signal that the guardian angel Claire is going to betray or disown his good Tess. Tess is still a bit worried by his conduct, that maybe he hadn't got that letter she had written to explain her past. And so she tries to tell him again. And he says, no, there is nothing you could do that would damage my opinion of you. Again, he's idealizing. But she says to him, look, I need to tell you. He says, I tell you what, on our marriage night, you can tell me, and I can share my deep and dark secrets with you. And Angel Clare on that wedding night tells Tess that he had a 48-hour debauchery with a woman in London, and that he is chaste, he is clean, he's determined to be that way. It was just this one-off thing when he was confused. And Tess is so excited. She says, now I know you can forgive me. Now I know. And she tells him about Alec d'Urberville, and he loses it. Tess is suddenly broken from this perfect ideal and has become normal, has become tainted. It's not how Angel wants her to be. And what we get here is the absolute hypocrisy of man against woman. And this is something that both sides are guilty of. You see, when Alec d'Urberville assaulted Tess, Tess is viewed as unchaste. Alec is not condemned by the church of his day, nor by the aristocracy to whom he belongs, although that's a tacit allowance that a man may break the morals, but he can be forgiven. Angel Clare, he engages in 48 hours of lust, and he knows he can be forgiven. He can tell Tess, knowing that he can have forgiveness. The society of his day will accept him. The religion of his day, if he wanted to, would accept his penitence. But Tess can't. She didn't spend 48 hours of lust with Alec. She was assaulted in a short time. But she is broken and filthy and impure and no good anymore. I mean, that is chronically hypocritical. And Hardy points this out, but remember, what is he really pointing at? The church of his day has allowed terrible hypocrisies to come along, and their answers for suffering are trite. Other philosophers and academicians and all those kind of people in the age of progress, they are beginning to espouse a theory in which they are better than the old standards. But ultimately, they're exactly the same. They still are conscious of position. Remember, Angel likes the fact that she's a d'Urberville. And they've still got these moral codes which apply for some but not for others. You can see Hardy tussling with this thought of where is fairness at all? It's not simply that God is not in his heaven. It's that all is wrong with the world. Humans don't fix it. Human endeavours have not created a fairer society. These perfect ideals and theories that were being produced quite a lot in the late 19th century were just not cutting it. They were just as hypocritical and base as what they were supposedly replacing. Enough, Angel himself recognises the contradiction in his own take on things, but he can't look at Tess the same. And she says, why can't you just forget that this was a past thing? You know, he knows it was a treachery against her. And she says, why can't you let go of that? And she says, you know, the principle is I am chaste now, like you were chaste, even though you had a past. But he says, it is not a case of principle, it is a case of respectability. We're stuck in the same trap. That's the problem. That any other philosophy, compared to the previous philosophies or ideas of the church of his day, are just as bad as each other. Around this point that we come to that quote of Browning's, which has been amended, where God is not in his heaven and all is not right in the world. Hardy is caught. You can see this is an author who wants good reason. and is a well-read author. But he can see the flaws clearly in the ancient religious systems, and he can see the flaws and cracks in the modern ideas, which many are vaunting and ignoring in his time because in theory they think it's wonderful. Let's just live as nature. But do you know what? They won't just accept nature as it is. They want to make it conform to sort of several pigeonholes, just like Angel Clare wants Tess to fit in this perfect little ideal box. Now, what's very interesting at this point is Alec goes back to his mum and dad. Now, remember, they are religious. And he's not totally against them. He respects the values and morality. And as he said to Tess, I don't need to be a Christian to have good values, to be moral. And that's very true, of course. But when he goes back to his mum and dad, he starts talking of Tess again. And they don't know all this background. And beforehand, they wanted him to marry a good Christian girl who went to church a lot. Her name was Mercy Chase. But he was determined to marry Tess. Now, what's interesting about his mum and dad is they had just been doing a little bit of Bible reading. And in the Bible reading they'd done, it was Proverbs chapter 31. And this chapter is known as the Capable Wife chapter, for those who read the Bible a lot. It defines what a good wife is. And nowhere in that chapter does it say she belongs to a good family. Nowhere in that chapter of the Bible does it define any expectations of where a woman comes from or what she's been. It just describes a woman who is hardworking, who is respectable, who tries her best, who looks after her husband, her house, her children, and that she is beloved by all in her household. She is almost on a pedestal and is deeply respected by her husband and children. And the mum says, do you know what? If Tess is like this, it matters not where she comes from, who she is. And this is a very interesting observation for Hardy to put into the book, because he's making a strange admission, one which absolutely pulverizes the BBC's horrendous misapplication of Tess's words. Because what Hardy's saying here is the Bible is actually all right here. The Bible's got some sensible things. Religion doesn't. What religion's done with it, this making up of grand schemes over things, of a clique who define society for their own favour, that's a problem. Tess should be able to carry on acceptably, but societal mores are damaging it. That's where a lot of the suffering is coming from. And I really must stress this now about what great writers do. Today, there is a propensity for people with any ideological inclination to set up a straw man character, a person who holds the opposite opinion and they're ridiculous. And you just knock flat down their argument and triumph, and it's good guy, bad guy. A really good writer who is truly honest, who is truly probing, will make their best arguments against both sides. And this is what Hardy does. He's made a good argument against the church of his day. But he makes a good argument against humanist philosophy as well. A philosophy where God does not exist. He says, why shouldn't I rebel against society? But that would be viewed as wrongdoing. That would be viewed as wrongdoing by both sets, the humanist and the religious. Hardy brings this test about. A little scene where Tess, Angel Clare has gone, deserted her, he's going to go to Brazil. And Tess goes and works on this turnip farm. I think it's actually I think it's in a swede field. So we'll just take a look at this. Look at the description and see if you can get the struggle Hardy is having himself with finding what is good, what is bad, what is just, why is there suffering, what is the meaning, where do we go from here? Every leaf of the vegetable having already been consumed, the whole field was in colour desolate drab. It was a complexion without features, as if a face from chin to brow should be only an expanse of skin. The sky wore in another colour the same likeness, a white vacuity of countenance with the lineaments gone. So these two upper and nether visages confronted each other all day long, the white face looking down on the brown face, and the brown face looking up at the white face, without anything standing between them but the two girls crawling over the surface of the former like flies. How do you get the sense of this? We have this desolate set of nature, and in the middle of this white sky and brown field are just two girls, but it says crawling like flies. Now this raises a big question. If all we are is like flies, why be concerned about justice and fairness and injustice and love and lovelessness? Do flies worry about justice and love and fairness? And this is a strength of Hardy. He's being brutally honest. His inclination is definitely towards the humanist way of doing things, but he himself is struggling when he gets the questions that this raises if there is no God in his heaven. And again, looking at this, we have to become an impartial reader. We may revolt when our own biases are put to the test. We may fob them off and say, well, that's been answered. We can't do that. Hardy is being a brilliant writer and a brilliant thinker because he's being so honest with himself. And this idea of animalism and just nature is taken further. Tess later bumps into, of all people, Alec Durbevilles again. But this time he's gone through a dramatic change. After his atrocious dealings with Tess, he decided to put things right in his life, and he's become like very religious, almost fanatical. And he's going around preaching the good word, and he bumps into Tess and he starts walking with her, and his old passions are aroused because he did want to marry her. He actually did like Tess, but he was just so self-centered. Tess says to him that she's lost her faith, her belief, and he asks why, and she says, because a better man than you says so. Now I found that interesting because Tess doesn't say, well, these are the reasons. She says, the church failed me, and this man, Angel Clare, he was just as upright. In fact, he was better in many respects, and he was very learned, and he said that I didn't need those old beliefs. That's not a good argument at all, but it's understandable, at least from Tess's perspective. She's been so abused that she's moved away from one area, and Hardy recognises this is the idea of a lot of people in his day. They've moved away from a system, the church system, which has failed to give them answers, has failed to improve their lot, and is hypocritical, and they've gone to the new philosophies of men because they're clever and look at the big engines and things that they can build, so they must know more. But it's too straw man. What Hardy's doing is he's saying, I can see a problem with both here. And it leaves him, the author, in a torment. And that comes through with Tess, and it makes this book so vivid and vital. It reaches down into the soul and squeezes your heart and your lungs. When questioned about what Angel has taught her, Tess tells Alec all the inconsistencies of religion that Angel has mentioned. And Alec listens to these arguments, and he says, little did the man know, by taking away the basis of belief, he brings her back into my clutches. Because he decides, well, with that reasoning, I can renounce the church too. But that brings up a particular problem. Alec Durbevilles speaks to Tess again when he finds her at this farm, and he brings up this conversation they had previously had, where he had learned Angel Clare's explanation away from religion. And Angel Clare had phrased that as, you can have morality without a dogma, without an underlying and underpinning reason. And he says this to her. He gets talking again. He says, about having what they call an ethical system without any dogma, I don't see my way to that at all. Tess says, why, you can have the religion of loving kindness and purity at least, if you can't have, what do you call it, dogma. Listen to what Alec says, and it's a biggie. Oh no, I'm a different sort of a fellow from that. If there's nobody to say, do this, and it will be a good thing for you after you are dead, do that, and it will be a bad thing for you, I can't warm up. Hang it, I am not going to be responsible for my deeds and passions if there's nobody to be responsible to. And if I were you, my dear, I wouldn't either. Can you see what Hardy is getting at? This is no just glib phrase in a story. Hardy is tussling with his own view. If religion is wrong and there is no God in his heaven, then no one is responsible to a higher power. And to say, well, you can still be good and just and loving kindness and all, that is true. People are, without a belief in God, good and just and can be fair and have that instinct. But what Hard is saying is, on what is it grounded? If there is no one to judge one's course afterwards, why on earth be responsible? Why not do whatever you want? If you were just two flies crawling over the surface of the earth with just this little existence, well then, I don't need to be kind to others. It doesn't matter if there's injustice. Suffering is not a question at all. Why are we complaining? Why are we arguing about it? You see, Hardy realises if you take God out of the picture, there's no foundational pedestal for morality. And this disturbs Hardy. You can see it in his writing. The words towards the end of this book are fairly quivering and trembling with tumultuous thought as Hardy's pulling all of this together. So can you see what Tess is really getting at? When I say Tess of the Durbevilles is getting at. We're seeing through story an author tussling with massive ideas about life and trying to draw some kind of conclusion. Although in Tess of the Durbevilles, he does not get to a conclusion. And that's the sort of sad thing about all of this. Hardy at least had a trust that humans might, now that they've got the Industrial Revolution, the Renaissance has brought about a certain development and advancing of the development of science which had begun in the Middle Ages. He's thinking maybe humans could do something better. They've come up with these brilliant theories and ideas and notions which Angel Clare depicts. But he can see that it's all undermined. And by World War I, when that broke out, for Thomas Hardy, the idea of human progress was gone. He just got on with his life. He, like Tess, was good and pure and kind. He really championed the cause of those who suffered. But he never seemed to get to the end of the thread to draw a conclusion one way or the other. So Tess, in that sense, is painful because the book, when it finishes, does it finish with hope? I don't think it does. It just finishes as if life moves on. So that was what I thought of Tess of the Durbevilles. I hope that this has been enlightening to you and that you've been able to engage with it. You don't have to agree with me, by the way. You may come at it from a different angle. And as with all literature, we find a lot of ourselves in it. Remember, good literature will confront us and chastise us, but only if we're unbiased readers. And when we're unbiased and let it move around and just listen to the thoughts of the author, we don't have to agree with the author at the end, but just listening to that perspective broadens one's understanding of oneself. And so there we go with Tess of the Durbevilles. What do you think? If you love classic literature and you want to learn more about classics, going in depth and reviews like this, and Shakespeare too is a standalone topic which I also discuss, then please hit the subscribe and ring the bell. And although these videos are a bit longer, just save them so that when you've got the time to go over them, you can watch them in full. Thank you very much, and I wish you well in your own reading journey.